Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 42 of the Push Podcast. This is the podcast for senior marketers who want to up their stakeholder management, listen to strategy talk, or simply feel seen. I'm your host, Jack Ferguson. I'm a brand consultant with over 15 years' experience in marketing across more than 20 industries. And today's episode is a solo episode. So I do these episodes in between the fortnightly discussions I have with other senior marketers, just simply to share a shorter story, explore a topic more deeply, or just simply give you something in between the co-hosted episodes that I do. So today I thought I would discuss the war that's been going around in marketing circles for roughly the last 10 years. I no doubt you've heard of it. It also happens to coincide with one of the most popular videos I've created in the last few years with the Push brand. So I'll talk about that video shortly. So this episode is about distinctiveness and differentiation, which is more important when making sales and growing a brand, and for stakeholder management purposes, how do we explain these concepts to them? So I'll give you my take on this episode and give you a few examples of how I explain these concepts to stakeholders and what I would lean on for growth at various stages in a brand's lifecycle. But firstly, how am I defining distinctiveness and differentiation for the purpose of this episode? So I'm going to lean on Mark Ritson's Defending Differentiation webinar quite a bit here. He did this with Kantar. I'll link to the video in the description of this episode. It is available on YouTube if you want to go and watch the whole thing. But basically the idea is that distinctiveness is making your brand easily identified by customers. So an example of that might be through a distinct brand asset, like the McDonald's M or the Qantas kangaroo. Very distinct. You look those assets and the brand associated comes to mind. Another aspect of distinctiveness is brand salience. So does this brand come to mind during buying situations, also known as category entry points? For example, Kit Kat has chased the category entry point of coming to mind during breaks for 60 odd years now. So have a break, have a Kit Kat. When someone thinks of having a break, Kit Kat wants to come to mind. So what I've discussed here is around distinctiveness. It's not about comparison. It's about one brand coming to mind. So you see a distinctive asset, one brand comes to mind. You experience a category entry point as a consumer. Your brand is more salient than others. Just so I don't misquote Byron Sharp here, the president of Ehrenberg Bass, who does promote distinctiveness very heavily. He says that brands need to be distinctive rather than differentiated. Distinctiveness makes a brand easy to find and easy to notice. Differentiation theorists assume buyers have strong brand preferences based on unique attributes, but in reality, most buyers are light buyers who don't think much about brands at all. And another key line there is, while brands do have differences, these are typically not very important to most buyers. Growth comes from increasing mental and physical availability, not from increasing brand loyalty through meaningful differentiation. So here, Byron's advocating for more of a meaningless distinctiveness as opposed to a meaningful differentiation. Now, I don't want to misquote him here. Some people say that Ehrenberg Bass deny the concept of differentiation, which they've clearly come out and said they don't. They just think that distinctiveness is a much bigger contributor to purchase decisions, which is a good lead into my definition of differentiation, which is centered around the concept of comparison. So ensuring your brand is perceived to be relatively different from alternatives. So faster, cheaper, more environmentally friendly, more stable, stronger. This is a question of degrees rather than absolutes. So it's better, it's not either or. Differentiation to me is also about the meaningfulness. So on attributes and associations that actually matter to your target customers. So I could wear a pink bunny suit to all my meetings with clients. Yes, it's different, but does the client value that? Is that going to help them make a purchase decision where they go with me instead of someone else? And so the third point is that it's not just about being different, but it's about being different enough across the right associations to influence purchase decisions. So the concept of differentiation does adhere to the theory that people are making comparisons prior to a purchase, and that's not always the case. But when they are making comparisons, differentiation can be quite useful. So an anecdote, and this goes back to that video that I was talking about earlier that I made under the Push brand, where I talked about both differentiation and distinctiveness being part of a purchase I made in the last couple of years. I'll briefly go over that again now, just so you know what I'm talking about, and perhaps so you could use a similar story with stakeholders when you're speaking to them. So I bought a laptop bag a couple of years ago. Revolutionary, I know. But how did that come to be? So what triggered that buying situation? I broke the strap on my laptop bag. I needed a new one. My category entry point was my laptop bag broke, or the strap on it broke. And what brand was salient for me when that category entry point happened was Officeworks. I didn't know another brand offering laptop bags, so I went there. I could have done research and compared brands, but in this case I didn't. I didn't perceive the effort that would go into the research to be worthwhile. So category entry point, I broke the strap on my laptop bag. What brand was salient? Officeworks. No comparison, simply distinctiveness. So then I get into Officeworks, and now things change a little bit. So Officeworks is a retailer, as I'm sure you know, that stocks a range of brands. And now the concept of differentiation comes to the party. So in store, I was comparing brands and products based on color, size, feel, price. And this part of the buying journey was very much about differentiation and not distinctiveness. Ehrenberg Bass would argue that at this stage, if a certain brand was mentally available, i.e. I recognized one of the brands that was stocked there, then it would be more likely I would buy that brand or that bag. In this instance, I didn't recognize any of the brands and was looking purely at the products. So this second part of the buying process was purely a differentiation play. It was all about comparison. I had no awareness of these brands prior to going into Officeworks this day. So that's a real world situation where both distinctiveness and differentiation played a role in the same sale. So we can factor both into our work as marketers. And in this case, they played a role almost separately in the buying process, but that's obviously not always the case either. If I had have recognized one of the bags, distinctiveness would have played a role in my choice there. If I had have done more research at the start, differentiation would have played more of a role earlier on. So what's more important and when? And I'm going to reference Kantar's data here. So they have data out that indicates that the stronger the perceived differentiation is towards the beginning of a brand's growth, the more it can grow. So whereas distinctiveness becomes more important as a brand gets bigger. And I like the example here of looking at everyday goods that we all buy, which is always good to reference for the purpose of convincing stakeholders, right? So let's look at Mars bars and Snickers. Yes, they may taste differently, but how would you communicate that? And is the fact that Snickers has nuts, for example, a meaningful difference to consumers? Is that what contributes to them buying Snickers? Or is it more about being distinctive at that brand level? After all, Snickers has chased a category entry point similar to that of Kit Kat for quite some time now. This is referenced on the categoryentrypoints.com website, which I'll link to as well. And it's a great website to simply explain to stakeholders what distinctiveness is, what category entry points are. But basically, they hypothesize that Snickers' strategy is along the lines, or would be along the lines of, become the snack of choice for hungry people the world over, with a focus on being salient for the category entry points around those moments of hunger outside of meals. So at the practical level, I have experienced what is similar to Kantar's data, where there is a certain ease, or it is easier to grow by focusing on differentiation more so than distinctiveness early on. And my theory here is that if you position yourself against something, it's easier to communicate to a prospect what you do rather than to trying to build distinctiveness from scratch, which is what you have to do with distinctiveness. There's no piggybacking when it comes to distinctiveness. You have to build it from scratch. McDonald's had to build the distinctiveness of their M from scratch. If you're chasing a category entry point, you have to associate your brand with that category entry point, but there's no piggybacking. You have to start from scratch. So I'm going to use the example of Uber. And what I say to clients about this is that it's easier to say cleaner than a taxi, cheaper than a taxi, friendlier than a taxi, more transparent than a taxi. And the value of this type of communication is that the prospect already knows what the taxi is. Then you can explain why you're different and why you're better. It helps to get the message across faster. You don't have to explain from scratch what you are. You can piggyback off, this is what a taxi is, let's start there, and here's why we're better. As opposed to encouraging prospects to say, get an Uber from day one. Because what the hell is an Uber? There's an educational cost to telling people what an Uber is. Now, Uber has really cashed in on distinctiveness, as we know. A lot of people know exactly what you mean when you say, let's get an Uber. But that's now, that's not when they started, and we're going through a lot of growth early on. So in summary, Kantar produces data. They've got a great graph on this that says that differentiation plays a bigger role in the beginning of a company or a brand's growth. Salience and distinctiveness play a bigger role as a brand grows or is getting much bigger. For stakeholder communication, you can use my laptop story or something similar that you have. You can use examples on categoryentrypoints.com, the website. You can talk about Uber or Snickers or the Kit Kat examples. I think those are easy way to explain these concepts to stakeholders. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the distinctiveness versus differentiation debate. So feel free to interact on the brand socials, whether that's LinkedIn or Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or email me at jack@bethepush.com. And I'd love to have a discussion with you about what you think of these concepts. Thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe wherever you're listening to this episode, and I will be back in your ears next week.